Close your eyes and take a deep breath. Today I invite you to a legend born from a wedding night shrouded in fear, prophecy, and silence. In the house of Danaids, 50 young girls grew up under the shadow of a warning that one day disaster would strike their father's home. As the 50 grooms came to take them, celebration and dread walked side by side, and beneath the wedding music in the darkness of the night, a darker command lay in wait. Yet this is not merely the story of the majority, but of a single person. While 49 brides obeyed the command given to them, one girl stood at the very edge of that darkness and chose a different path. Her name was Hypermestra, and her single act of mercy would outlast both fear and kings, echoing far beyond that dark night. For sometimes the quietest refusal is the moment that alters the fate of an entire lineage. Before we begin this epic, I have a small request that means a lot to me. Please don't forget to subscribe to my channel. The greatest reward for all the effort I put into creating these epics is your support through subscribing to my channel. If you enjoy my content and want me to continue creating more, your subscription and like truly give me great motivation. Also, don't forget to share your thoughts with me in the comments. Your comments not only encourage me, but also help me understand what kind of epics and stories you would like to see on this channel. Thank you so much in advance for your support. Take a deep breath, relax your mind, and let the rhythm of this ancient legend guide you, wishing you a peaceful sleep. The epic of the Danaids, 49 brides obeyed, one refused, begins now. In ancient times, whenever the Nile overflowed each year and left behind dark, fertile soil, people believed that this had been a gift not only from the water, but from fate itself. Danaus and Aegyptos, the twin sons of Belos, who ruled over those fertile banks, had grown up in just such a world. They had walked through the stone courtyards of the same palace, studied under the same teachers, and had been regarded as the future of the same dynasty. Their mother, Anchinoe, had raised them with equal care, and their father had accustomed them both to ruling, making decisions, and appearing strong. But as their childhood went on, the difference between them became more distinct. Danaids spoke slowly, thought deeply, and rarely opened himself easily. A measured seriousness often rested on his face. Aegyptos, by contrast, could not be contained by the place he stood in, never hid what he wanted, and chose to overcome whatever stood before him rather than wait. When Belos died, the division that followed looked, from the outside, like nothing more than an arrangement of inheritance. In truth, it became the first great sign that two brothers born from the same root would no longer walk the same road. After the lands were divided, Aegyptos did not remain satisfied with the portion that fell to him. When he looked to the horizon, he did not see borders, only a dominion that needed to be expanded. The trade routes that stretched beyond the deserts, the cities along the water, and the plains where the herds roamed had all turned, in his eyes, into pieces that had to be brought under control. Through the campaigns he carried out, he made his name known in distant regions and tried to make his will endure in the places he seized. When he came to rule the lands inhabited by the people known as the Blackfeet, the fact that the region came to be called by his own name grew from that same impulse. To him, power was not something entrusted to be preserved, but something that had to keep growing. For that reason, his twin brother Danaids, who ruled in Libya, gradually began to appear less like kin and more like a boundary standing in his path. The atmosphere in his palace shaped itself accordingly. Even if the advisors never spoke openly of his intentions, everyone had begun to understand that Aegyptos's gaze would one day inevitably turn westward toward his brother's lands. That thought was not yet spoken aloud, but it had already become a quiet knowledge moving through the palace. Aegyptos had 50 sons, and these young men had been raised from childhood within their father's world. In the mornings, they practiced with weapons in the courtyard, and in the evenings they listened at the table to talk of conquest, bloodline, and authority. Power did not appear to them as a desire learned later in life, but as the natural order of existence. Danaus's life carried a different weight. He too was the ruler of a great lineage, but at the center of his life stood not only armies, but also his family. His 50 daughters in particular were to him not merely children, but a future that had to be guarded with care. His palace in Libya rose across a broad plain open to winds from the sea, and its white stone walls took on a red glow at sunset. Although the place seemed peaceful from the outside, a constant vigilance remained awake within it. Danaus watched his brother's sons from afar and tried to understand what kind of thinking shaped them as they grew. No open threat stood before him yet, but sometimes the truest danger revealed itself in a person's eyes before it ever reached the door. Danaus's unease began in just that way. Danaus loved his daughters, but in proportion to that love, he kept them apart from the world. Inside the palace, everything remained orderly. Morning prayers, the tasks of midday, walks in the courtyard, and the hours spent on the terraces in the cool of evening. The daughters moved through colonnaded passageways in fine linen garments, and the golden pins in their hair shone in the evening light. Hypermestra stood out through her composure and careful manner, while Amymone carried a different air with her livelier gaze and open warmth. Even so, they all lived within the same circle. Danaus carefully determined whom they saw, what they heard, and how much they needed to know. He did not regard this as cruelty, but as an unavoidable form of protection. He was certain that Aegyptos's ambition would one day stretch as far as his own household. For that reason, instead of widening his daughter's freedom, he found safety in narrowing the world around them. No matter how wide the garden spread, the world grew small when a person's life remained confined within boundaries drawn by fear. Danaus's household had begun to turn into exactly such a place. Safe, orderly, but increasingly closed. Aegyptos's palace moved to an entirely different rhythm. There, the corridors did not carry soft whispers, but loud disputes and firm judgments. As his 50 sons gathered around their father, Libya ceased to be merely the land of a relative across the shore and became a sphere of power that would one day have to be united. Danaus's 50 daughters had also been placed at the center of that design. The young men regarded them less as people with wills of their own than as links that would bind two arms to a single body. Aegyptos encouraged this belief and spoke of marriages between cousins as though they were a natural right. In that way, family bonds slowly ceased to be a willing closeness and turned into a political design. No war had yet broken out between the palaces rising on the two sides of the Nile, but the two households no longer looked toward the future in the same way. On one side stood a father who wanted to preserve order by protecting his family. On the other stood a ruler who regarded even kinship as a tool of dominion. The difference had first been born in thought, then It had shown itself in words, and at last it had begun to shape everyone's conduct. For that reason, the conflict that approached did not come suddenly, but had been growing for a long time. As time passed, the distance between the two brothers became even more pronounced. The envoys no longer carried the old warmth. They chose their words carefully and often spoke without revealing their true intent. Disputes over the sharing of the Nile's water, the border pastures, or the passage of trade looked on the surface like ordinary matters. But behind them lay a deeper calculation. Aegyptos saw Danaus's manner as weakness, while Danaus sensed, in each of his brother's steps, a growing desire to impose pressure. The daughters noticed this change as well. From the terraces of the palace, when they looked toward the distant shore, they sometimes saw Aegyptos's sons and felt the self-assured hardness in the way they carried themselves. In those gazes there was no closeness of family, but something disturbing that resembled the desire to possess. Amymone sensed this early in particular, while Hypermestra chose to keep it within herself. As Danaus saw the silent unease in his daughters' faces, he began to act with even greater caution. And so, although the feeling of safety within the household seemed to increase, everyone had in truth begun to live beneath the shadow of an approaching decision. The Nile kept flowing, but the balance between the two dynasties had lost its former simplicity. Although priests, advisors, and elderly nobles stepped in and tried to calm both sides, their words found no answer. The matter no longer concerned only a wish for marriage. Aegyptos saw the union of his 50 sons with Danaus's 50 daughters as a step that would turn his dynasty into a single power. Danaus, however, believed that behind this desire lay not family closeness, but control. When night fell, secret conversations began to unfold in certain rooms of the palace. Plans were made behind walls in low voices, and oil lamps burned until dawn without going out. Danaus told his daughters that his brother's intention was not to form a warm bond, but to bind them into his own order. Those words left deep marks, especially in the inner worlds of the young women. They clung more tightly to their father, yet at the same time became more fearful of the world outside. Danaus's love gave them shelter, but that same love also turned into a wall that cut them off from everything beyond it. Inside the palace, everyone now carried the same question. What would happen? No one yet knew the answer, but it was clearly felt that the events drawing near would change not only the fate of two brothers, but that of two families at once. The nights of Libya did not bring comfort, even after the day's scorching heat had passed. The wind struck the stone walls of the palace and moved through the long corridors, leaving behind a dry moan, as if an unseen hand had tested the old doors. Danaus did not sleep that night. He now felt more clearly that the conflict between him and his brother Aegyptos had not only concerned land, water, and borders. Something troubled him from within, something he could not explain and could not cast off. He had turned his palace into a closed world in order to protect his 50 daughters, yet he kept thinking that even that might not be enough. When he leaned against the stone railing of the balcony and looked out over the dark plain, every shadow moving in the distance seemed to announce news that had come for him. His fear for his daughter's future no longer felt like the mere anxiety of a father. It was as if a judgment not yet spoken had already set out and moved steadily toward him. Before dawn broke, he made his decision. To untie the knot inside himself, He would go to an ancient temple forgotten in the depths of the desert and try to receive an answer from that silent place said to hold the language of the gods. The next morning, as the sun cast a sharp light across the sands, Danaids set out with a few loyal guards. The desert looked empty from a distance, yet it held a silence that seemed to listen to man. The sand crushed beneath their feet hid every step, yet enlarged every thought. After a long journey, they reached the temple, which seemed buried inside a rocky rise. From the outside, it gave the impression of a structure half forgotten, and fine sand drifted between its stone columns with the wind. Once they stepped inside, the air changed. The daylight remained behind them, replaced by the heavy scent of incense, the weak glow of oil lamps, and a silence in which even a man's own breath sounded too loud. In the innermost part of the temple sat an old seer. Her face remained in shadow, and her hands rested motionless on her knees. As Danaids approached, the woman did not raise her head, yet she seemed to have sensed his coming long before he arrived. The king placed offerings before her, but the seer did not even look at them. In that moment, Danaids felt that while he had believed he came there seeking an answer, he might instead have been summoned only to hear words that had long been moving toward him. When the seer's voice finally rose, the air in the chamber grew even heavier. The old woman fixed her eyes not on Danaids, but on some invisible line standing behind him. Her words came slowly, but each one was certain and beyond recall. She told Danaids that keeping his daughters behind walls would not stop fate. Then she revealed the true judgment. His end would come by the hand of a bridegroom who entered his own palace. For a moment, Danaids could not speak. The stone floor of the temple held steady beneath his feet, yet the order within him shook. Until that moment, the word bridegroom could have meant family bond, political balance, and an unavoidable future. Now it echoed like a sign of his end. As the seer's voice continued through the room, Danaids' mind turned directly to Aegyptos and his 50 sons. His brother's long-standing wish for marriage had taken on an entirely different meaning beneath this prophecy. When he left the temple, the sun still stood high, yet the world no longer looked bright to him. He walked now thinking not only of his daughter's future, but of his own end as well. From that day forward, his fear changed direction. He focused less on the enemy outside and more on the one who would enter through his gate. When he returned to the palace, his daughters moved to greet him as they always had, but they noticed the change in his face at once. Hypermestra stepped forward and tried to take her father's hand, but Danaids pulled back with a short, harsh movement. It was the first moment that truly startled his daughters. While Amimone and the other sisters tried to understand what had happened, an invisible cold spread through the palace. Danaids spoke little that day. He shut himself inside one of the inner chambers, asked to be left alone, and ordered guards to keep watch outside the door. By the time evening fell, everyone who knew him had begun to think the same thing. The king had returned safely from the outside world, but he had come back carrying some other burden within. The weight of the prophecy had changed him at once. He no longer saw his daughters only as children who needed protection, but as gateways through which strangers would one day enter his palace. That thought made him more suspicious, harsher, and more calculating. What had once been caution now turned into a state of nearly constant vigilance. Love had not entirely left its place, but fear had now mixed into it, and that changed the atmosphere of the house all at once. It was during those days that news arrived of a splendid ship coming from beyond the Nile. The ship did not carry only gifts, fabrics, and decorated chests. It also carried the open intention of Aegyptos. When the messenger entered the palace, he wore heavily embroidered garments and royal insignia around his neck, and his bearing resembled not so much a mere envoy as a representative certain of his own superiority. Danaids received him in the throne room. His daughters stood lined up behind him, and the sight gave less the feeling of a family gathering than of a carefully arranged line of defense. When the envoy opened the letter and began to read it aloud, everyone in the room fell silent. Aegyptos declared that in order to end the tension between the two families, he wished to join his 50 sons to Danaids' 50 daughters in marriage. The words were orderly, and from the outside even resembled an offer of reconciliation. But something else lay beneath the lines. This marriage would not only strengthen kinship, it would also become the easiest way to establish influence over Libya. Danaids understood that from the very first sentence. The seer's voice rose again in his mind, and every word in the letter cast a new shadow over the prophecy. As the envoy continued to speak, the pressure behind the offer became more visible. If Danaids accepted, the two dynasties would unite. If he refused, the consequences would not remain within the family alone. Peace along the borderlands could break, trade routes could close, and even armies could begin to move. Aegyptos did not appear to issue an open threat, yet the language he used was enough to make Danaids feel how narrow his choice truly was. In that moment, the king saw both possibilities in all their nakedness. On one side stood open conflict. In that case, his people, his land, and his daughters would fall under immense pressure. On the other side stood acceptance of the marriage. That road might appear to be peace from the outside, yet it meant walking directly into the heart of the prophecy. Danaids' thoughts began to shift rapidly. If his end would come by the hand of a bridegroom, then he could never truly trust any of the bridegrooms who entered his palace. He placed a calm expression upon his face and told the envoy that he needed time to consider. Yet that request was only the appearance of hesitation. In his mind, the question that had already begun to take shape concerned not wedding preparations, but how he might build a path to defeat fate itself. After the envoy left, Danaids gathered his daughters. In the great chamber lit by oil lamps, every face looked tense. No one could deny that what they had just heard was no ordinary marriage proposal. Danaids told them that he saw the sons of Aegyptos not merely as suitors, but as the representatives of an order that would strip them of their freedom. His words were harsh, yet within that harshness there was not only fear, but helplessness as well. He told his daughters that his brother's true intention was not to build a household, but to bind them and Libya beneath his own rule. That speech left a heavy mark on the inner world of the young women. Hypermestra became one of those who felt most deeply the change in her father's voice. Amimone, listening to all that was said, began to understand that a decision was pushing them down a road from which there would be no return. After that night, the atmosphere of the palace closed in even further. Danaids secretly summoned certain craftsmen, began preparations in hidden chambers, and whispered what would be done only to the people he trusted most. Every command he gave left an unspoken burden within the house. What was now being discussed was no longer a wedding, but an approaching trial, a trial that would weigh both family bonds and consciences. At last, Danaids sent word to the envoy that he would give a favorable answer. Yet this acceptance was not true consent. It was a path chosen to gain time and establish his own plan. Outside the palace, that news might have been received as the sign of a coming peace. Inside the palace, however, everyone felt how heavy a decision it had been. As Danaids tried to escape the shadow of the prophecy, he had sought the solution within the walls of his own house. He went from room to room among his daughters and explained to each one what kind of order of submission would be built behind this offer. In their eyes, what stood before them was not a promise of happiness, but the surrender of their own lives to the will of others. The young women drew closer to one another, yet they could not escape the hard circle of thought their father had built around them. Danaids had now reached a threshold beyond return. His fear no longer drove him only toward defense, it had also begun to shape the fate of others. Thus, while trying to flee from a prophecy, the king unknowingly placed a heavy burden upon the souls of his daughters as well, and pulled them all together into a dark decision. After that night, if one looked down from the highest places of the palace, the skies over Libya appeared quieter than ever. Yet that silence deceived. Even the thought of distant sails not yet visible and guests still approaching had already changed the order of the house. In the palace of Aegyptos, preparations for celebration had begun, and his 50 sons viewed the marriage as a great triumph. In the palace of Danaids, the same news carried a very different meaning. No one there spoke anymore of wedding joy. They thought only of what the coming days would bring. At night, Danaids climbed the tower and looked out over the horizon as he drew in the salt-laden wind. He felt his brother's shadow reaching as far as the palace walls, yet he still did not step back. In his eyes now, every road led to the same center, getting ahead of fate. For that reason, the decision he made became not only an answer, but a breaking point that would determine the future of the entire family. The old conflict that had begun on the banks of the Nile had now ceased to be an ordinary matter between dynasties. It had opened the door to a far heavier reckoning, knotted between God's men and the bonds of family. On the Libyan coast, there was a deserted cove where the sand met the sea, a place that shone white beneath the sun by day and heard nothing but the wind at night. It was there that Danaids finally understood with certainty that the only way to escape his brother Aegyptos and the growing threat of his sons lay not on land but at sea. The decision he had made in the palace was now taking visible form. Craftsmen had been summoned in secret, cedar and pine logs had been moved under cover of night, and blacksmiths had wrapped thick cloth around their anvils to muffle the noise. Danaids had personally overseen every detail, because what they were building was not an ordinary boat, but a great vessel of hope that would carry his 50 daughters into the unknown. That was why the prayers offered to Athena had never ceased. The king believed that the goddess herself had inspired the idea, and he attributed the unexpected skill in the craftsman's hands to her favor. As the wooden hull rising in the cove grew larger day by day, everyone felt that it was not merely a vessel, but a silent doorway made to pass through the narrow opening fate had left them. As the ship neared completion, the air along the shore changed as well. The scent of felled trees mixed with the salt wind, and with every plank fitted into place, an invisible clock seemed to quicken. Danaids' daughters had not remained apart from the work. Before sunrise, they woke and carried food supplies, water vessels, cloth, and the family's valuable belongings from the palace to the shore piece by piece. The knowledge of weaving, which they believed Athena had taught them, now came to life in the sails of the ship. Hypermestra, burdened by being the eldest sister, tried to suppress the fear of the others. She kept her voice calm and worked harder so that her hands would not tremble. Amimone, setting aside her cheerful nature, took charge of placing the water skins and protecting the provisions set aside for the journey. In those days, the 50 young women were no longer only the daughters of a king, but the builders of their own escape. None of them said it aloud, but whenever they touched the ship's hull, they all felt the same thing. The life they were about to leave behind had already begun to close. Danaids often reminded his daughters that this journey was not an exile, but a return to the ancient land of their ancestors. Each time he spoke the name Argos, there was not only hardness in his voice, but also a strange conviction. To him, this escape, even if it had been born from fear, did not take its direction from fear alone. A far older trace in their blood was calling them westward again. When the ship was finally completed, everyone standing on the shore fell silent for a moment. With its long hull, 50 places for oars along its sides, and broad sails meant to carry the wind, it was something no one there had ever seen before. Resting at the water's edge, the ship looked both strong and fragile, just like the people who would board it. Danaids had Athena's sacred signs carved into the prow, offered sacrifices, and made his daughters memorize the prayers to be spoken before they set out to sea. When the final night of preparation came, no one truly slept. The ship, tied along the shore, stood out in the darkness like a great shadow, and as the wind tightened the ropes, it seemed to urge them onward. By morning, not a single voice remained that spoke of turning back. The moment the ship left the shore, the yellow coasts of Libya began to shrink slowly behind them. The first steady strokes of the oars did more than move the vessel forward. They also placed distance between the travelers and the closed years they had spent within palace walls. In the first hours, the sea looked calm, its surface resembling a vast stone slab gleaming in the morning light. The daughters kept looking back until the coast disappeared from view. After that, every gaze turned forward almost against its will, because nothing lay before them now but the unknown. Danaids stood beside the steering oar, trying not to let the hard expression on his face break. But the daughters who knew him best could still see that fear remained alive in his eyes. Hypermestra struggled to keep her sisters together, preserve order, and stop panic from spreading. Amimone, meanwhile, managed the water and provisions in the middle of the ship. Focusing on work was easier than thinking. The first days passed in a strange silence brought on by the vastness of the open sea. Yet that silence seemed temporary to everyone, as though the sea had only just begun to measure them. Once the Libyan coast vanished completely, the true face of the Mediterranean revealed itself. First the wind hardened, then the rhythm of the waves changed. The ship began to pitch more violently at once, the rowers lost their rhythm, and the things on deck struck against one another. As evening fell, the sky darkened, and the sea swelled until nothing remained of its morning calm. Lightning flashed in the distance, and in those brief bursts of light, the rising waves looked even larger than they were. Though Danaids remained standing at the helm, he knew now that this was no longer a journey that human will alone could command. The daughters gathered in the middle of the ship. Hypermestra had them sing hymns to calm them. At times their voices vanished into the wind, and at other times they struck the ship's timber and came back. Amimone, trying to steady overturned containers and cargo that was about to scatter, fell to her knees several times. but never gave up getting back to her feet. That night, everyone understood for the first time that escape did not mean only leaving land behind, but also being tested against the greatness of nature itself. When the storm drove them toward the shores of Rhodes, the ship had already passed through a brutal trial. After the waves withdrew, the rocky coastline that appeared before them looked less like a harbor than like a brief breath granted by the gods. When they stepped onto land, most of them could not speak for a while. Simply feeling the firmness of the ground beneath their feet was a relief in itself. Danaids did not want to linger there, but he knew they needed rest if the journey was to continue. On a rise in Rhodes, he ordered a small sacred place to be made in thanks to Athena. Stones were gathered, a simple altar was built, and the daughters laid the flowers they found on the island upon it. That pause changed something inside them all. They understood more clearly that the journey was no longer only about fleeing, but also about enduring, adapting, and holding on to one another. Even so, no one believed they were safe there. They did not know how quickly the men of Aegyptos might receive word of them, so they rested, prayed, and returned to the ship as soon as they were ready to set out again. After they left Rhodes, the sea treated them more gently. The waves were still strong, but now they seemed to have accepted carrying the travelers rather than testing them. As the days passed, the salt in the air, the burning sun, and the long hours spent on the narrow deck wore everyone down. Even so, a new order took shape aboard the ship. It was quietly understood who would help the rowers and when, who would distribute the water, and who would remain beside the sisters who fell ill. Danaids spoke less and watched more. His daughters, meanwhile, learned to read both the sea and one another. At last, one morning, rocky shores began to appear through the mist. When Danaids stepped forward and said that this was the land of Argos, a silence fell over the ship that none of them would forget, because those words carried both a destination reached and a new uncertainty. When the daughters looked toward the shore, they did not see a lush green country, but a harsh and arid landscape. The earth was cracked, the watercourses had grown shallow, and the wind moved through the stones with a dry coolness. Yet it was a place beyond the threat they had left behind, and for that moment that alone was enough. As the ship entered the Gulf of Argos and drew close to shore, the 50 young women began to prepare themselves one by one. In each hand was an olive branch wrapped in wool, meant to show that they came as suppliants. Danaids had chosen that sign deliberately because they would stand before the people and king of Argos, not with weapons, but with a plea protected by sacred custom. When the first steps touched land, the exhaustion of the long journey weighed heavily on them all. Even so, the importance of the moment could be felt. This shore marked not only the end of an escape, but also the beginning of a plea for a new life. Amymone looked at the rocks and the dry beds around them, with eyes searching for water, while Hypermestra walked just behind her father. Though her face looked calm, she felt the weight of all that was happening deep within herself. Behind them, the ship swayed with the light waves, silently reminding them of the road it had traveled. It was no longer only a vessel. It had become the visible proof of the road stretching from the shores of Libya to Argos, of fear, hope, and endurance. Anyone who saw it would immediately understand that these strangers from the sea were not ordinary guests. The first people who saw them on the coast of Argos were struck with astonishment. They had never seen a group come ashore in such a great wooden vessel, and before them stood 50 young women, and walking at their head, a king with a hard gaze. Danaids placed his daughters behind him on the beach, set his staff against the ground, and prepared to present them not as foreigners, but as rightful claimants bound to this land by ancient ties. As the sun slowly descended behind the mountains, the sea glowed with a red light. The silence that began that evening on the coast of Argos was a strange silence, one that carried the weight of the events about to unfold. For Danaids and his daughters, the voyage had ended, but the true trial was only beginning. Behind them lay the sea. Before them waited a dry land and an uncertain welcome. The first ship stood on the shore, darkening slowly in the last light of the day, as though it had taken all that had happened into its memory and fallen silent. As the 50 sisters walked close together toward the city, everyone felt more or less the same thing. The escape had succeeded, but the distance placed between them and fate might not have been as great as they had hoped. When they set foot on the land of Argos, the first thing that greeted them was not safety, but the harsh face of drought. The hills rising in the distance, the stony plains, and the cracked earth made it clear that this country had long thirsted for water. When Danaids stood by the shore and looked around, he understood that even life itself had barely held on in the place they had come to as the homeland of their ancestors. The bed of the Inachus River had dried up, and only the trace of its former flow remained among the stones. The wind did not seem to come from the sea, but from deep within the earth, blowing dry and dusty. When he looked at the faces of his 50 daughters, he saw not only the weariness of the journey, but also the weight of thirst. Their lips had cracked, and salt and dust had settled into their hair. For the people of Argos, this sight may have been familiar, but for this family that had come from Libya with hope, this place at first appeared like a land the gods had silently chosen to test. Before Danaids stood before Pelasgus, he understood that the most urgent matter was not shelter, but water. Because in this foreign land, their survival first depended on whether the earth would grant them life. Danaids called his daughters to his side and listened to them carefully. Then he ordered each of them to scatter in different directions and search the dry stream beds, the bases of rocks, the shade of trees, and the traces of old springs. This was not an order given for an ordinary daily need alone. It was the first trial that would determine whether they could hold on in Argos or not. The daughters took bronze or golden vessels into their hands, gathered up their light garments, and set out before the sun climbed higher. Some turned north, some toward the inner plains, and some toward the rocky passes. Among them, Amymone chose to go south, toward the region of Lerna. There was in her nature a kind of attentiveness that differed slightly from that of her sisters. She had been good at sensing the smell of the earth, the way leaves rested, and the faint changes in the air. As she walked, dust filled the spaces between her sandals, and the heat rising from the stones burned against her legs. Even so, she did not turn back, because finding water would not only mean easing her sister's thirst, it would also be the one piece of news that could lighten the constant strain in her father's face, if only for a moment. The road to Lerna had been quieter than the open plains of Argos. Dried trees cast crooked shadows, and even the fragments of fallen leaves scattered with a brittle crackle across the ground. Yet here, Amymone began to sense something she had not felt elsewhere. The drought continued, but from time to time, the wind carried a faint coolness, a trace so slight that it resembled moisture. It was not certain. Still, For someone walking in thirst, it was different enough to count as hope. Amimone quickened her steps, sometimes bending to look at the bases of stones, sometimes following winding marks that resembled old watercourses. At that very moment, a young deer slipped out from the brush and passed before her. The animal stopped a few paces away, turned its head and then leaped again. In that instant, Amimone could not tell whether this was only chance or some strange sign that called her toward a place. Even so, the urge within her outweighed caution, and she ran after the deer. For a moment, she had forgotten her weariness, the heat, and her thirst. That graceful body seemed to draw her toward the place where something hidden lay. The deer appeared and vanished at short intervals, and without realizing it, Amimone moved deeper into the lonelier part of the woods. Then the moment came when the animal appeared again before a thicket. Amimone raised the short spear in her hand. Not to kill it, but to turn its path or stop it, she hurled it quickly, but the spear did not strike its mark. A harsh sound rose from behind the brush, and immediately after, a satyr straightened up from the shadows. With goat horns, long ears, hard features, and a wild appearance that unsettled the human heart, that creature carried the untamed side of nature within it. Its sleep had been broken, and it had sprung to its feet in anger. But what troubled it most was not the blow itself as much as the sight of the young woman standing before it. There was a threatening and disturbing intent in its gaze. They declared that if Argos did not protect them, they would end their lives in the sacred place. When Amimone realized that she no longer had a weapon in her hand, she stepped back. When the satyr began to move toward her, she turned and fled. Dry branches cracked beneath her feet, the hem of her garment caught in the brush, and the narrow openings between the trees drove her forward, without her knowing where they led. Far from her sisters, she had been left alone in a place where no one would hear her. When her breath tightened, she stopped before a rock and looked back. As the satyr's steps drew nearer, Amimone understood that she no longer had the strength to run. Through the center of her fear, she lifted her head and called out to the god who ruled both the sky above and the hidden waters. On that parched earth, the name of Poseidon carried both wrath and hope. The thirst of Argos in its own way also recalled his power. Although Amimone's pleas seemed to vanish into emptiness, the air around her changed at once. The wind suddenly carried the smell of salt. Even the leafless branches trembled like reeds by the shore. A faint tremor passed through the ground. The satyr stopped, looked behind him, and for the first time it became clear that he truly felt fear. Poseidon's coming was understood not as a distant flash of light, but through the way nature itself suddenly changed direction. The air grew heavy, the light sharpened, and even silence took on another form. When Amimone lifted her head, she saw before her not only a power that had come to help, but a divine being who touched human fate. In that moment, even if she did not yet fully understand it, she had felt that the ordinary course of her life had already fallen behind her. With Poseidon's appearance, the satyr's courage scattered. The god stepped forward with his three-pronged trident in his hand. His motion was swift, but resolve showed more clearly than anger. The weapon he hurled struck not the creature, but the rock beside it. That single act was enough to drive the satyr away. The satyr retreated in fear and disappeared into the trees. Amimone had fallen to her knees, looking at the ground with her breathing thrown out of rhythm. When Poseidon approached her, even the air around them seemed changed. The scent of the sea mixed with the smell of the dry earth, and even silence sounded different. The god raised her to her feet and told her not to be afraid. At that moment, Amymone felt that the power before her was not only a force that had saved her, but a being who had reached into her fate. Poseidon had not remained indifferent to the beauty of the young woman. He had not wished merely to protect her, but to bind her to his own destiny. He told her that this encounter had not happened without purpose, and that she had not come to Argos only to seek refuge, but to open a gate in the destiny of this land. Then he pointed to the trident lodged in the rock and asked her to pull it free. When Amymone grasped the trident with trembling hands and pulled it from the rock, a muffled sound rose first from within the stone, and then clear water burst forth from 3 separate cracks. The dried earth became wet at once, the color of the stones deepened, and the silence of Lerna filled with the sound of running water. As Amymone felt the cool drops striking her face, she noticed that Poseidon's gaze still rested on her. This was not a passing act of help, but the open sign of divine will. Poseidon told her that this water would not only relieve the thirst of Argos, but would also change her own life in an irreversible way. In that moment, Amymone could not fully grasp the full weight of those words, yet she understood that she could no longer wholly return to her former life, because in Poseidon's nearness to her, there was not only mercy, but also the chilling weight of being chosen. The closeness the god showed carried more than a brief tenderness felt for a rescued mortal. On that day in Lerna, with the spring that opened there, the quiet beginning of a new line was also laid in Amymone's life. Later, a son who would be remembered with the sea, Nauplius, would be born as the lasting mark of this encounter. For that moment, the only thing Amymone knew was that the thirsty earth had finally begun to speak with water. As Amymone returned, her steps differed from the way she had come. She walked the same stony paths again, this time with a full vessel in her hand and a heavy secret within her. When Danaids and the other daughters saw her from a distance, they slowed at first, and then gathered at once when they noticed the water gleaming inside the vessel. In the eyes of people worn down by thirst, that sight had been clear enough to need no words. As Danaids looked at the water his daughter had brought, he felt both relief and deep thought, because this was not merely a source that had been found, it was a sign that the gods had directly touched both this land and his own family. When Amymone told them what had happened, her sisters listened closely. Some saw it as an open blessing, while others saw it as the beginning of a bond that would grow even greater in time. Danaids, as always, carried joy and suspicion together. Water was necessary if they were to remain in Argos, but the gods drawing this near to the lives of his daughters only deepened his need for control. Even so, for that day, everyone's need was simple: to bring their hands, their faces, and their throats into contact with that cool water. The spring from Lerna soon began to count as hope not only for the family of Danaids, but for the land of Argos itself. When water began to run again, the air of the drought-stricken country may have remained the same, but something changed in the way people looked upon it. Danaids gathered his daughters again and told them that the help of the gods could always bring a trial with it as well. Those words sounded heavier, especially when he looked at Amymone, because what had happened to her was far greater than mere chance. As the sisters listened to the sound of the spring that had risen from Lerna, they felt both relief and uncertainty. Argos was no longer only a land of dry stones, but with life returning, the number of those who would set their eyes on this place could also grow. Danaids had sensed this. The abundance of water did not mean that safety would come on its own. As the sun descended behind the mountains in the evening, the surface of the spring reflected the last light and carried a delicate gleam. That image remained for Danaids and his daughters as both a sign of hope and a quiet reminder that fate had not yet finished its work. When the spring Amymone found began to send water flowing once more through the land of Argos, the air of the drought-stricken country changed, if only a little. That cool voice rising from between the stones breathed life not only into the soil, but also into the rumors that had reached the city. Even so, that small relief did not ease the pressure inside Danaids. Though he had taken refuge in Argos with his 50 daughters, he could not drive from his mind either the sons of Egyptus or the ominous words he had heard from the seer. Because of this, he wasted no time, gathered his daughters beside him, and walked toward the most sacred place in Argos. In each young woman's hand, there was an olive branch wrapped in white wool. Those branches were not merely ritual objects, but clear signs that they had placed themselves under the protection of the gods. When they climbed the temple's high stone steps, the wind gently stirred the girls' thin veils and their garments, stained with the dust of the road. As Danaids placed them around the altar, he knew that this silent arrangement was not only a plea, but also an open summons that would force the king of Argos to decide. Before long, word reached Pelasgus. When the ruler of Argos climbed the sacred hill with several guards, he saw before him not an ordinary embassy, but 50 young women clinging to sanctuary, and before them an old yet unbending king. Pelasgus's gaze moved first to the olive branches, then to the faces of the girls. Their skin, their clothing, their jewelry, and the air they carried seemed foreign to the people of Argos. Yet in their bearing there remained the trace of a noble past, rather than that of ordinary strangers. Danaids drew his daughters behind him, stepped forward, and addressed Pelasgus with respect. He presented them not as fugitives, but as a bloodline returned to the land of their ancestors. He explained that they had fled a marriage bond that others had tried to force upon them against their will, and that because of this, they had crossed the sea and come there. Pelasgus listened in silence. What he heard stirred both pity and suspicion in him, for although the group before him seemed in need of protection, accepting them was a matter great enough to shake the inward-turned order of Argos itself. As Danaids continued speaking, the weight of the story grew even more evident. He said that the sons of Egyptus saw this marriage not as a union of family, but as an instrument of property and dominion. He made it clear that his daughters did not wish to be surrendered to a bond that would be made without their consent. In these words, Pelasgus sensed something greater than an ordinary family quarrel. There was fear on the faces of the young women before him, but that fear had not risen only from an approaching wedding. It had grown from the deep dread of having their lives handed over to the command of others. The careful silence on the faces of Hypermestra and Amymone in particular did not escape Pelasgus's notice. Still, the king could not decide at once. To open the gates of Argos would not mean only protecting these women, it would also mean facing the power that followed after them. On one side stood the sacred right of sanctuary, and on the other, the possibility of leading the city into war. Because of this, Pelasgus understood that the matter before him was too grave to be settled by mercy alone. After hearing Danaus's words, the king began to ask questions. He wanted to learn about the customs in Egypt, the bonds of kinship, and the law on which this demand for marriage rested. The daughters spoke in turn. Their words carried a shared emphasis. A marriage made without consent was not just even if it appeared sacred. When Pelasgus heard this answer, he understood more clearly that the matter was not merely a struggle between two dynasties. To him, the duty of a ruler was not only to protect his city from outside danger, but also to weigh the just plea that came to his gates. Yet in doing so, he could not place the lives of the people of Argos at risk. Two voices clashed within him. The first reminded him of Zeus's law that protected suppliants, and told him that rejecting these women would bring divine anger. The second commanded him to consider the cost of confronting a foreign power. As Pelasgus's hesitation lengthened, the air around the altar grew heavier. Danaus tried to preserve his patience, and the daughters waited with their heads bowed. But as the waiting stretched on, it began to feel as though this silence would harden into a harsher decision. At last, the daughters of Danaus saw where the king's uncertainty might lead. The fear rising inside them gave way to a sharp resolve. Pointing to the bands and ties around the altar, they said that if Argos would not protect them, they would surrender themselves to an irreversible destruction on the threshold of the sacred place. These words were not a crude form of threat. They marked the final edge of desperation. Such an event within a sacred place would have been for Argos not only a shame, but a heavy stain that could call down the displeasure of the gods. When Pelasgus heard these words, the expression on his face changed. For the first time, he clearly saw how unshakable a will stood behind the fragile appearance of the women before him. There was no middle path left for him to retreat into. Either he would accept them and prepare Argos for a possible conflict, or he would reject them and leave both the sacred place and his own conscience beneath a dark burden. Because of this, Pelasgus decided that it would not be right for the decision to come from his mouth alone. He wanted to be not a tyrant ruling Argos by himself, but a ruler who respected the will of his people. Pelasgus told Danaus to take some of the olive branches to the altars, in the center of the city as well. In that way, the people would see that this plea for sanctuary was not merely a matter discussed within palace walls, but one spoken openly before the gods themselves. Then he sent messengers, and the people of Argos were summoned to the assembly square. As the sun stood harshly overhead, the news moving through the city spread everywhere, from narrow streets to stone courtyards, from the market to the workshops. Before long, the square filled with people. Some were curious about the women who had come, some spoke of Egyptian ships that might approach, and some simply wanted to hear what the king would say. When Pelasgus stepped before the crowd, his voice carried to the very back of the square. First he explained the sacred nature of suppliants, then he reminded them of the divine responsibility that could come from rejecting such a plea. After that he spoke plainly of the more immediate danger, the possibility that Argos might find itself facing a foreign power. In that way, he asked the people to decide not only with emotion, but knowingly and with a clear understanding of the cost. A long murmur moved through the square. People spoke among themselves, turning their eyes first to Pelasgus and then to the white-wrapped branches laid upon the altar. When the king spoke again, his voice had grown heavier. The honor of a city, he said, was measured not only by the strength of its walls, but also by the way it responded to a just plea that came to its gates. These words had a strong effect on the crowd, for although the people of Argos did not want war, they also understood what it meant to ignore a ritual guarded by the gods. The branches Danaids carried moved quietly in the wind, and the unseen yet deeply felt presence of the girls seemed to stand in the square itself, adding weight to the decision. At last, Pelasgus asked the people for their judgment. In the square, hands slowly rose, then lifted more firmly into the air. The majority showed their will in favor of accepting the suppliants. This decision did not merely open the gate to 50 foreign women, it declared that Argos had placed the law of the gods above its own fear. When Pelasgus saw the outcome, he drew a deep breath. He felt relief, because the decision had been made. But at the same time, he also knew very well that the decision would not come without a cost. When the news reached the sacred place, Danaids returned to his daughters. When he told them that Argos had taken them under its protection, the sisters felt a true sense of relief for the first time since their arrival. Some closed their eyes and prayed. Some bent down and touched the stones of the altar, and some wept in silence. Yet the tense lines on Danaids' face did not disappear, for he knew that this acceptance was not an end, but only a brief moment to catch their breath. Argos was now their refuge, but at the same time it was also the place where the danger following them would arrive. Pelasgus, meanwhile, did not remain idle after his decision. He ordered the city's watchers to keep careful watch on the coasts and the guards to inspect the walls and the passes. He had shown mercy, but he did not want to leave it as an act of goodness without preparation. That night in Argos, everyone thought the same thing in a different way. These women had been placed under protection, but with them, a trial had also entered the city. As evening fell, the silence settling over the city carried less of peace than of the weight of the days approaching. As Danaids settled his daughters into the secure parts of the palace, he accepted that the spring anemone had found, and the decision of the people of Argos had given them a temporary support. Even so, the fear within him did not fully subside, for he felt that beyond the door closed by Pelasgus's difficult decision, other doors would open. That night, the sisters sat closer to one another. No one spoke loudly, but the same question filled every mind. How long would the protection Argos had offered last? As the olive branches laid upon the altar slowly began to wither, the meaning they carried grew even heavier. Because of those branches, a city had opened its gates. Yet that same decision had also placed the city at the center of what was coming. Pelasgus had preserved his honor and made Argos a city that acted in accordance with the law of the gods. But like every right decision, this one too carried a cost. As night fell, the wind outside the walls grew harsher, while within them the waiting deepened. Argos was now preparing to receive not only its new guests, but also the fate that would follow behind them. That morning, the shores of Argos could not preserve their usual silence. As dawn broke, the pale light spreading across the sea first revealed only a distant, dark shape. Then that shape slowly took form, turning into masts, sails, and the rhythm of oars. The fishermen working along the shore narrowed their eyes at first, then stopped what they were doing one by one. What appeared on the horizon was not an ordinary trading fleet. With their dark hulls and steady advance, the approaching ships made their intentions clear even from a distance. The news quickly spread from the coast into the city. The fleet coming from Egypt had not reached Argos merely by crossing the sea. It had brought with it the threat Danaids had thought he had left behind. Watching the sea from above the rocks, Danaids felt the cold weight of the prophecies settle inside him again the moment he saw the ships. To him, this was not only a sign that his brother's power had reached this far. Each of those black sails seemed to announce that the hands that would one day enter his palace as sons-in-law and bring about his end had drawn closer. The marks of long journeys, fearful nights, and endless calculations were already etched into Danaids' face. But that morning, his gaze hardened even more. When he struck the stone ground with his staff, the sharp sound was enough to make his daughters standing beside him flinch. He no longer thought only as a father, but as the old defender of a city about to be surrounded. The 50 young women standing behind him drew closer together when they saw the ships approaching the shore from the high part of the sanctuary. Hypermestra tried to keep her sisters from scattering. Her voice remained calm, but the concern in her eyes could be felt plainly. As for Amimone, as she looked at the sea, she could not help thinking of the sound of water rising from Poseidon's spring, alongside the noise of this approaching fleet. On one side stood the flow that gave life to Argos, and on the other stood the will that threatened this new refuge. On the sisters' faces, both the weariness left by the journey and the fear of being seized again could be read, because the arriving ships carried not only their past, but also the future they did not want. As the fleet drew closer to the shore, the details of the ships began to stand out. With their long hulls, dark carved prows, and oars moving in the same rhythm, they presented an orderly and terrifying sight. These were not the boats of men gathered at random, but the instruments of a power accustomed to command. The people of Argos gathered on the shore and watched from a distance, and even though no one spoke openly, it was clear that what approached was not a delegation of goodwill. From one of the ships, a richly dressed messenger stepped ashore. Tall, self-assured, and carrying himself as though he did not belong to the place where he stood, this man stepped onto the stones of the coast like someone who had already claimed them. The embroidered robe he wore, along with the copper and gold ornaments, showed that he was not merely carrying a message, he also embodied the commanding attitude of the Egyptian court. A few sailors stood behind him. When they stepped onto the shore, all of them looked around carefully, trying to learn the direction of the sanctuary. The messenger quickly turned his eyes toward the women who had taken refuge there, and the contempt on his face revealed an arrogance that made no effort to hide itself. In his gaze, he did not see human beings before him, but property to be taken back. Even the messenger's walk toward the sacred ground was a challenge in itself. It was impossible that he did not know what the right of asylum meant in Argos, but if he did know, it was obvious that he did not care. When he reached the boundary of the sanctuary, he did not stop but walked farther in. Danaids stepped in front of his daughters, but the man's voice rose before Danaids could speak. His words were not the language of an envoy seeking agreement, but of a master giving orders. He described Danaids' daughters as women who had to return to their masters, and he tried to portray their presence there not as sanctuary, but as the concealment of stolen property taken from its rightful owners. Those words echoing among the stones of the sanctuary hardened the faces of the Argives. The women clutched their olive branches more tightly. Amimone stepped back once, while Hypermestra signaled to her sisters to stay closer together. Even so, the messenger did not hold back. Not content with what he had said, he came a few steps closer, and for the first time the silence of the sacred ground filled with the clear feeling of a threat. The matter was no longer only a spoken demand. By pressing against the boundary, the man showed that he was ready to ignore the judgment of Argos. Danaids' daughters immediately understood where this approach could lead. To them, the man standing before them was not an ordinary representative, but the living face of the order they had fled throughout their journey. Even the tone the messenger used when he addressed several of them directly and called them back to the ships made his intention clear. This was not a call to marriage. It was a claim of possession that treated consent as meaningless. Some of the daughters pressed closer to one another in fear. Some lowered their eyes, and some, for the first time, did not hide their anger. Danaids knew that at that moment he could not stop this man by himself, but he also refused to take even a single step back. When the envoy crossed the boundary once more and reached his hand toward one of the young women, everyone in the sanctuary tensed at once. The silence in the air broke instantly. Drawn breaths, shifting garments, and hard footsteps echoing on stone all ran together. At that moment, it became unmistakably clear that this aggressive behavior was no longer only an insult aimed at the family of Danaids, but a violation directed at the sacred order of Argos itself. After that moment, returning to peace through words alone became too difficult. Argos's answer did not come late. When the sound of bronze shields and spear shafts striking the road leading up to the sanctuary was heard, everyone turned their heads. Pelasgus was climbing quickly but with measured steps at the head of his guards. The expression on his face no longer carried the hesitation of the previous days. The people had made their decision, and the king regarded it as his duty to uphold it. The messengers entering the sacred ground in this manner was a challenge not only to the refugees, but also to the will of the people of Argos. When Pelasgus reached the boundary of the sanctuary, he stopped, and his voice rose clear, hard, and too firm to leave room for argument. He declared that those seeking asylum there could not be touched, and that the protection Argos had granted could not be broken by force. Those words rang out above the noise coming from the shore. Even with Pelasgus standing there, the messenger did not step back. The mocking expression remained on his face. To him, Argos was placing itself in the path of a greater power for the sake of only 50 women. But there was no sign of retreat in Pelasgus's bearing either. What stood between the two men was not only a group of women, but two different understandings of justice. The messenger said that by Egyptian law, these women belonged to the sons of Aegyptos, and that for this reason taking them back had to be regarded as natural and legitimate. Pelasgus listened without interrupting him, then answered with a single sentence. In Argos, no one would be handed over to another against her will. That brief reply laid out the heart of the dispute in plain terms. In the messenger's world, bloodline and power decided everything. In the order Pelasgus defended, there was a boundary, and in the presence of the gods that boundary stood out even more sharply. The words grew harsher, and the stares grew tighter. Although the men beside the messenger waited behind him, it was clear that their hands did not hang loose. The Argive soldiers also kept no relaxed grip on their spears and waited only for the king's command. As the sisters watched this confrontation in silence, they began to feel their fear turning into something else. For the first time, Argos no longer seemed to them merely like a temporary shelter, but like a power truly ready to stand between them and those pursuing them. Even so, everyone knew that a single spark on the shore would be enough. The air was as heavy as the sea before a storm. The tension rose further when the messenger shoved an Argive guard roughly. That act clearly crossed the line of argument. Pelasgus stepped forward, and his soldiers tightened with him. The shields came into a single line, and the spearheads flashed in the sunlight like a streak. Faced with that sight, the Egyptian sailors hesitated. What they had expected here was not a simple retrieval, but resistance. Even if the confidence in the messenger's eyes did not fully break for the first time, it was clear that he had begun to calculate. The army of Argos might not have been a great campaigning force in numbers, but at that moment it had formed a resolute barrier around the sacred ground. Pelasgus declared that if they went any farther, this would no longer count as diplomacy, but as open assault. The messenger remained silent for a long time. In the end, he understood that they would not get what they wanted that day. He withdrew, though not like a man accepting defeat, but like one who would return shortly with greater force. As he turned back, he said that Argos would pay the price for this, and that the ships that had come to its shores were only the beginning. Those words sounded less like the final sentences of a departing man than like the announcement of a greater pressure drawing near. After a while, the fleet turned back toward open water. The black sails were moving away from the shore now, but what they left behind was not relief, but a heavier waiting. No one moved until the Egyptian ships disappeared from sight. When Danaids finally came down and stood beside Pelasgus, his face held both gratitude and a deepened unease. He thanked the king of Argos, because that morning it had truly been the king's resolve that had protected his daughters. But the fear inside Danaids had not eased, it had only changed shape. The prophecy was still there, and now the road by which it would reach him seemed to have become even clearer. Pelasgus, meanwhile, was thinking about the consequences of his decision to defend his city. He had shown mercy, but he also knew now that this mercy had carried Argos into a greater trial. The sisters leaned against the columns of the sanctuary, huddled close to one another as they waited. Even when Amymone took water from the spring to cool her face, she could not wash away the unease inside her. Hypermestra, meanwhile, held her sisters' hands one by one, because in that moment, the thing they all needed most was not to scatter, but to remain together. As evening fell, the city began to change. Watchmen were placed along the coast, the weak points of the walls were examined again, and the soldiers began to stand longer watches at the passes. Argos might once have been a city that lived with drought, famine, and ordinary border troubles, but now everyone felt that it had been drawn into a much greater story. Danaids led his daughters back behind secure walls once again. When they withdrew to their rooms that night, the image of the black sails they had seen that morning still stood before their eyes. The masts, the dark cloth, and that commanding man who had stepped onto the shore seemed not like the event of a single day, but like the first appearance of a disaster that would last much longer. The decision Pelasgus had made had brought honor to Argos, but that honor would now have to be defended. As Danaids thought of the dangers circling around his daughters, he moved toward a decision growing harder inside him. When the night deepened, the wind along the coast rose again. The black sails were gone, but their shadow remained over Argos. The city was no longer only a refuge, but the place where the coming reckoning waited. When the Egyptian ships pulled away from the shore and began to shrink on the horizon, no one in Argos truly believed the danger had passed. Even after the black sails vanished from sight, the pressure they had left behind remained along the coasts and in people's minds. After the tension in the temple, King Pelasgus returned to the palace without delay. He gathered his advisors, the commanders of the guards, and the leading men of the city. Danaids was present at that meeting as well. The heart of what was said was clear. The Egyptian side had not backed down, but had only seen that its first move had failed to achieve its aim. Argos could resist, but the cost of an open siege or a long war would have been heavy. Pelasgus felt the responsibility of having granted asylum to the suppliants on his shoulders. Danaids, meanwhile, stood under two separate pressures at once. As the threat from outside grew, the old prophecy within him came alive again. In that moment, everyone understood that the city was no longer facing only a question of refuge, but a harsher knot that would determine the future of two dynasties. Toward noon the next day, new representatives arrived from Egypt. This time those who came ashore did not behave as crudely as the previous ones had, and they chose their words with greater restraint. Yet the heart of their offer had not changed. The sons of Egyptus said they wished to marry the daughters of Danaids, and that this was the only way to end the tension between the two families. From the outside, this proposal was presented as a compromise that would prevent war. But for those who saw what truly lay beneath it, it was clear that this was not a union built on consent, but a submission imposed through pressure. The representatives stated that if Argos accepted this bond, the ships would withdraw and the hostility would not grow. Otherwise, everyone understood that the sea would not remain silent. This was where the real difficulty began for Pelasgus. What stood before him was not a direct attack, but an offer of peace that would summon war if it was refused. Protecting the honor of Argos, the rights of the suppliants, and the safety of his people all at once now seemed almost impossible. No matter which way the decision went, a price would be paid. Pelasgus did not accept this proposal without first speaking privately with Danaids. In one of the cool, high chambers in the inner part of the palace, the two kings sat facing one another. Neither courtesy nor comfort remained in their words, only necessity did. Pelasgus said that Argos would not withdraw its protection of asylum, but he stated openly that leading his people into open war was not an easy decision. Danaids understood where these words were going from the very first moment. If the daughters were given, the war would be delayed and perhaps even prevented. If they were not, Argos could be drawn into a grave conflict because of him. The old king remained silent for a long time. This proposal was not only a political solution, it meant that his own fate had come to his door. If the bridegrooms entered the palace, the prophet's words would enter with them. Even so, he could not ignore the burden Pelasgus carried. Argos had received him and his daughters, and for their sake had allowed the threat of war to reach its shores. To argue now for an absolute refusal would have meant leaving open to the fire the city that had opened its gates to him. That was why Danaids' silence weighed more heavily than his anger. The decision was not announced at once, but the atmosphere of the palace changed that day. Pelasgus spoke one last time with his advisors, gathered the reports from the watchers along the shores, and confirmed that the Egyptian side was ready to increase the pressure. In the end, unwillingly, he chose a path. Argos would accept these marriages in order to prevent open destruction. This was not a decision of joy. It was only an attempt to delay a greater disaster. As Pelasgus declared it, he himself knew that this was not a true peace. When he looked at Danaids' face, he clearly saw how deeply this forced consent had broken him. When the news spread through the city, some felt relief. At least war would not break out immediately. But others sensed that such a compromise carried a new darkness within it. And when the news reached the sisters, waiting in the temple with their suppliant branches, the silence grew even heavier. What they had feared was no longer a distant possibility, but was turning into an official union that would be prepared before everyone's eyes. Argos had protected them, but now that same city was becoming the stage for a wedding they did not want. That evening, Danaids called his daughters to his chamber. When Hypermestra, Amymone, and the others looked at their father's face, they saw that he was no longer only an anxious father, but had drawn tight like a ruler trapped against a wall. Danaids said openly that this decision had not been made with his consent. He explained that Pelasgus had been forced into it in order to protect the city, and that the Egyptian side had dressed it up as peace. Then he voiced his real thought. These marriages were not being sought in order to build homes, but in order to seize them from within. The daughters listened without speaking. On some faces there was anger, on others fear, and on others a frozen silence. Despite the coolness of the water she had found at Lerna, Amymone felt the weight of this news in her whole body for the first time. Hypermestra, meanwhile, sensed that something else stood behind the hardness in her father's voice. This was not only hatred toward the other side, but a deeper and more personal fear. Danaids did not speak the prophecy aloud that night, but most of his daughters now understood more clearly why he had been growing darker. That conversation took the marriage decision out of the realm of state affairs and carried it directly into the heart of their family. After the decision, the preparations quickly gathered speed. The Egyptian side did not want this matter to drag on, and Argos feared that if it waited, the tension might turn back into war. Scribes were called, names were drawn up, and matches were arranged according to lineage and age. Hypermestra's name was written beside Lynceus's. Across from Amymone's stood Enceladus. The other sisters, too, were listed one by one. From the outside, this process might have looked like a great dynastic order, but for those within it, it was an extremely cold and mechanical act. Every name that was written did not bring the two families closer together. On the contrary, it tightened an invisible bond a little more. As Danaids watched the scribes, he almost never spoke. Words were no longer enough to stop what was happening. Pelasgus, meanwhile, hoped that this arrangement would ease the pressure that had pressed against the city's shores. But even he noticed, as the names multiplied across the parchments, how lifeless and forced this ceremony truly was. Wreaths began to be woven, fabrics laid out, hymns prepared, and guest chambers arranged throughout the city. But there was no true wedding joy in Argos. There was only fear that had been postponed. When the night of the feast arrived and everyone took their place, everything looked exactly as it should have from the outside. Bread, fruit, wine, and hot dishes were placed on the tables, hymns were sung, lights were lit, and the image of the two dynasties sitting side by side was carefully preserved. The grooms were at ease, and most of them saw it as a result they had rightfully earned. Pelasgus remained dignified. His eyes kept watching the hall, moving around the room as if he wanted to sense even the smallest disturbance before it happened. Danaids, meanwhile, had forced a calm expression onto his face. The sisters were silent. Not one of them seemed like a natural part of this feast. As the night went on, The difference between the visible cheer of the great hall and the utter silence growing in the inner parts of the palace became more distinct. Danaids acted as though he were waiting for a moment. When the cups were filled a little more, when the voices rose and attention scattered, he quietly rose from his place. Without drawing anyone's eye, he moved into the deeper part of the palace. Because in his eyes, the true face of the night would appear not around the wedding table, but behind closed doors. The feast continued, but for him, another night had already begun. Danaids first entered Hypermestra's room. The young woman had been dressed for the ceremony, her hair gathered with heavy care, a thin veil resting over her shoulders as she waited. The moment she saw her father, she felt the air in the room change. After Danaids closed the door, he remained silent for a while. Then he placed the small chest he had carried beside him onto the table. When he opened the lid, finely made daggers appeared inside. These were not tools hidden at random, but the quiet proof of a preparation that had been thought out in advance. Danaids took one and held it out to Hypermestra, and said that this night was not the wedding night it appeared to be. His voice was not loud, but it left no room for turning back. He explained that there was no other way left to protect themselves, and that if this marriage was completed, not only his daughters' lives but his own life too would fall under the command of others. As Hypermestra felt the cold weight placed in her hand, she understood more clearly than ever before that her father saw her not as a daughter, but as the last support of his own fear. In that moment, it was not only a father and daughter facing each other in the room, but fear and conscience as well. Danaids followed the same path in the other rooms. He went to each of his daughters one by one. In some rooms he spoke only a few sentences, in others he stayed longer. Each time, he expressed the same thought in different words. He said that this was not a real marriage, that the other side wanted to take possession of them, and that at the end of the night, only they themselves could protect their honor. These conversations did not happen as shouting or open threats. They sounded more like the form fear had taken after gathering inside him for a very long time and turning into an order. Some daughters understood what their father wanted the very first moment, and their faces hardened. Some stayed silent, held their breath and lowered their heads without being able to reject what had been placed in their hands. Amimone thought of her own fate, which had begun in Lerna with a divine touch, and now tried to understand how that same life had led her toward such a different choice. Danaids' words did not settle into their minds in the same way. Some accepted this as the only way to survive, while others could not even object because of fear. But all of them understood that the night would no longer end with its old meaning. After that moment, the feast remained nothing more than an image continuing outside. Danaids' persuasion did not rest only on fear. He had also filled it with words like honor, obedience, and protection. He told his daughters again and again that they belonged to no one, that these marriages would not leave them free, but would instead take their lives away from them. He reversed the humiliating language the Egyptian envoy had used in the temple and tried to turn the other side's claim of right into anger in his daughters' minds. In this way, what had been placed in their hands became not only a hidden tool, but a command hardened by the father's own thinking. Even so, not all the daughters received it the same way within themselves. Hypermestra sensed something else behind every sentence her father spoke. There was not only the desire to protect them there was also the effort to prevent his own end. That was what stopped her. because Danaids was placing his own fear onto their shoulders without thinking about the wound that would open in his daughters' souls. For the first time, Hypermestra both pitied her father and pulled away from him. That night, she understood that where love and fear became entangled, that was where a person was left most alone. The first invisible division between her and the other 49 daughters who had received the same command was born precisely there. When the final part of the preparations began, the palace seemed to split into two separate worlds. In the great halls, the music still continued. Servants were finishing the last tasks, and words suitable for a wedding were still being spoken. In the inner chambers, however, a heavier silence moved through the air. When Danaids' daughters returned to the great hall, a carefully guarded calm rested on their faces, but each of them was aware of the hidden weight she carried beneath her sash. As Amimone watched the loud and self-assured manner of Enceladus across from her, she found the danger her father had described more believable. Some of the other sisters also sensed the same harshness or coarse sense of entitlement in their own grooms. For that reason, they carried the command with less hesitation. Hypermestra, however, noticed something different when she sat beside Lynceus. The young man did not speak too much in order to make himself seem superior, nor did he display the easy manner of someone belittling her with his gaze. That was not enough for trust, but it was enough to shake the decision that had been placed in Hypermestra's hand. Sometimes what did not clear a person at once was not some great act of goodness, but an unexpected restraint. Her first hesitation began in that way. When the feast ended and the corridors began to empty, everyone seemed to be passing through the same wedding, yet they were no longer walking toward the same night. After the feast had broken up, the sounds of the palace quickly faded. The hymns drifted away, the footsteps grew sparse, and the brightness of the great halls gave way to a deep silence moving through the long corridors. As the grooms made their way to the chambers set aside for them, the brides withdrew as well in that same silent order. After that hour, every door within the palace closed, not before two people, but before two different intentions. From the outside, Danaids had appeared to withdraw, but in truth he had been listening to every step of the night. For his daughters, retreating to their chambers, had not marked the natural continuation of the wedding, but the beginning of the moment in which they would be tested by their father's secret command. Some had already settled it firmly within themselves. Others stood for a long time at the edge of the bed, opening and closing their hands, trying to steady their breathing, listening to the silence beyond the door. In some rooms, the manner of the men standing before them made carrying out the order easier. In others, hesitation lasted longer. The reckoning of the night did not begin with one great crash, but room by room, breath by breath, within a heavy silence. That was why the inside of the palace turned into a place far darker than the Argos outside. What took place that night might have looked from the outside like a single outcome. Yet in every room the same decision had not been made with the same feeling. The 49 sisters carried out their father's command in anger, in fear, or because they saw no other path. For most of them, the matter had rested less in the person standing before them than in the weight of years of pressure and the burden of their father's word. In a few rooms, short, muffled sounds had been heard. In a few others, a heavier silence had settled after a single movement. Though the palace servants had not fully understood what had happened, they sensed that the ordinary flow of the night had been broken. As Danaus watched the lights in the windows from a high place, he stood frozen like a man awaiting the outcome of his own command. In his eyes, that night had concerned his own fate before the lives of others. As he tried to nullify the prophet's words, he did not think about what he would leave behind in his daughters' souls. As the hours of the night passed, the air of the palace changed completely. The chambers prepared for the wedding suddenly lost their warmth, and all turned into places holding a silent outcome that would be carried into morning. It could be felt clearly in the walls of the palace that nothing would ever be as it had been. Only one chamber broke away from that common line. After the door had closed, Hypermestra did not move for a long time. She felt the presence of the slender dagger beneath her sash with every breath, trying to separate her father's voice from another voice within herself. Lynceus, however, did not behave like his brothers. He neither spoke like a victor who saw himself as superior, nor tried to force his way through her silence. That restraint tightened the knot inside Hypermestra even further. If the man standing before her had been nothing more than someone who had come only to claim her, her father's command might have been easier to carry out. But now the matter had ceased to be only about obedience or refusal. For the first time within herself, Hypermestra drew a clear distinction. Being loyal to her father was one thing. Carrying his fear without questioning it was another. There had been no harsh possessiveness in Lynceus's manner, like the kind she had felt in the temple. In that moment, Hypermestra understood that by the end of that night, she would either become exactly like her father or part from him completely. Her fear remained, but conscience had taken its place beside it. For that reason, she did not carry out the command exactly as it had been given. The only line of mercy that changed the course of the night was born there. When Hypermestra awakened Lynceus, her voice was very soft, yet the decision itself was as clear as her own resolve. She whispered that if he stayed there, dawn would never break for him. She did not give long explanations, because there was no time for that. Even the heavy silence coming from the other chambers of the palace was enough by then to show that something had changed in a way that could not be undone. At first, Lynceus was startled. Then he grasped the weight of the situation. Hypermestra described to him the hidden exit, the narrow passage the guards would not be able to see, and the path leading up to Mount Lerna. That moment was not only the escape of one man, but the birth of a division of fate within the same family. For the 49 sisters had carried out their father's command as, in their own minds, a way of protecting themselves. Hypermestra, by contrast, recognized that the same command would darken her as well. Before Lynceus departed, he looked at her. Gratitude, astonishment, and a devotion that could not fully be expressed in words settled on his face at once. And Hypermestra, for the first time that night, felt that even within fear it was possible to choose what was right. Sometimes the greatest ruptures began not with the loudest sound, but with a whisper. After Lynceus disappeared into the darkness through the window and the rear passage, Hypermestra remained alone in the chamber. In that moment, the silence in that room weighed more heavily than in any other chamber of the palace. For while what had happened in the others could no longer be taken back, the decision made there still lived, and its consequences were only beginning. Hypermestra held the slender dagger in her hand for a while longer, then set it aside without using it. Her fear had not ended. On the contrary, it had become more tangible now. She could already imagine what she would face when her father learned of it. Even so, for the first time in that moment, a clear sense of peace stirred within her. For she had not, simply because she had been commanded to, joined an irreversible darkness laid upon another human being. That decision, small as it might have seemed, had not become a weakness in her eyes, but another form of protecting herself, not turning completely into her father's darkness. That was what Hypermestra had chosen. When footsteps began to sound in the corridor beyond the door, she knew she would no longer be able to hide anything. For that reason, she neither disturbed the bed nor tried to rearrange the room. She only remained where she was and waited. Sometimes a person's full resistance appeared not in fleeing, but in standing still and facing the outcome. Toward the end of the night, the other sisters came before their father one by one. There was no joy on their faces. There was only exhaustion, numbness, and an emptiness that had not yet found a name for the weight of what they had done. When Danaids saw them, he believed at first that he had achieved what he wanted. He wanted to believe that he had broken the force of the prophecy, and for that reason he looked upon the scene before him only as deliverance. But he did not wish to see that those standing before him were his own daughters, and that after that night every one of them would become someone else. He counted them one by one, saw whether any were missing, and then noticed Hypermestra's difference. When the chamber was checked, it became clear that Lynceus was gone. At that moment, Danaids' anger turned back into fear. For in his eyes, the survival of even one groom meant that the prophecy still breathed. Hypermestra no longer appeared to him merely as a daughter who had defied his command, but as a doorway opened onto his own end. Danaids' reaction in that moment showed clearly that his fear had never ended. Every defense he had built through the night cracked again through the escape of a single man. As dawn began to break, there was a sharp difference between the inside and the outside of the palace of Argos. Outside, the city had not yet awakened, and had still taken the night for the continuation of a strained but established order. Inside, everything had changed. A heavy silence moved through the corridors, and the chambers no longer seemed to belong to a wedding night, but to stand as carriers of the result it had left behind. Hypermestra was kept apart, far from forgiving her choice. Danaids saw it as the most dangerous opening left against his own life. Meanwhile, the 49 sisters were left face to face for the first time in the cold of morning with the consequences of what they had done. The decisions made under the pressure of the night took on an altogether different weight in the light of day. As they carried out that command, they began to understand that they had not moved closer to freedom, but entered into a deeper burden. That was why the morning did not become a morning of victory. Even Danaids, before he could form any sense of relief within himself, gave way to a new fear. The prophecy had not been ended completely. Thus the silent reckoning of the wedding night was completed, not only by what had been left behind, but by the consequences carried into morning. Argos was no longer only the city where a forced peace had been established, but the witness to how that peace had collapsed within a single night. In the first hours of the morning, news of what had happened in the palace did not remain confined within its walls. The servants' whispers, the hardness on the guards' faces, and the unusual silence spilling out of the chambers soon drew the attention of the people of Argos. At first they tried to understand why the wedding night had turned into such a heavy mourning. Then word began to spread that Hypermestra had been kept apart, that she had not obeyed her father's command, and that one of the bridegrooms had escaped. The news shocked the city. The arrangement that Pelasgus had accepted to prevent war had unraveled on its very first night. Danaids, accusing his daughter of defying his command, began preparing the ground for an open trial against her. But in the eyes of the people of Argos, the matter was not simply a conflict between father and daughter. Many had begun to find it contradictory that these women had been granted protection in the name of their own will, only for one of them to be punished now for showing mercy. Not everyone interpreted what Hypermestra had done in the same way, but no one could dismiss it as a simple whim. When her decision was set beside what had happened during the rest of the night, it carried an entirely different weight. Danaids had Hypermestra taken from the inner part of the palace and shut away in a deep, lightless place. In his eyes, this was no longer just disobedience. It meant that the prophecy remained open. The captivity that began for Hypermestra looked like punishment from the outside, but the feeling she carried within was more complicated than that. Yes, she was now behind stone walls, and guards stood watch outside her door, but knowing that Lynceus had escaped gave her a thin, stubborn strength within all that darkness. The silence of the dungeon felt more honest to her than the false order of that night in the palace. She was now far from the places where everyone had played a part. She thought of her father's anger, but she did not doubt her own decision. Fear was still there. She was not free of it. But for the first time, a clear inner peace had mixed with that fear. She had remained loyal to her own conscience in spite of the command. Because of that, being in chains or under guard did not diminish the decision she had made within herself. On the contrary, it made it stand out even more sharply. Danaids, meanwhile, went up to the upper part of the palace and waited for dawn. He wanted to build some sense of relief within himself, but he could not. Everything he had done to crush his fear had cracked open again because of Hypermestra's decision. Until that moment, 49 outcomes had seemed enough to him. Now a single absence changed the meaning of the whole night. In his eyes, the prophecy had not been something that could be defeated by arithmetic. If one bridegroom still lived, then the possibility still lived as well. That was why Danaids carried no triumph that morning, only a fear that had been postponed. The more he wanted to punish his daughter, the more visible his own fear became. In his eyes, Hypermestra was no longer a daughter, but the last living link to the end he had tried to escape. That was why the anger he felt toward her had not been the ordinary anger of a father. It had been the helplessness of a man fighting with fate. Yet for that very reason, Hypermestra's silent composure grew even greater before him, making the fracture inside Danaids impossible to hide. At the same time, Lynceus moved toward the mountain, unable to drive from his mind the palace he had left behind and what Hypermestra had risked for him. When he reached the foothills of Mount Lerna, he stopped and looked back. Argos stood far away, a heavy shadow in the dark. As Hypermestra had told him, he lit a signal fire on a high place to show that he had arrived safely. The fire looked small in the darkness of the mountain, but its meaning was great. When Hypermestra, looking up at the sky through the narrow opening of her cell, saw that light, she was able to take a deep breath for the first time. It showed her that the decision she had made had not been in vain. Danaids saw the same light. But for him, the sight brought not hope, but a clear sign of an approaching reckoning. The small fire burning on the mountain spoke more loudly than the silent night inside the palace. Lynceus was alive. Hypermestra had sent him away. The prophecy had not ended. So the darkness that had settled over Argos ceased to be only the result of a single passing night and became a line stretching into the future. From that moment on, Danaids' fear no longer looked at him only from within, but also from beyond the mountains. As the day went on in the city, Hypermestra's name began to be spoken in many different ways. Some saw her as the daughter who had broken her father's command, while others saw her as the only one who had done what no one else could on that same night. For Pelasgus, this development was deeply troubling. The arrangement he had accepted to prevent war had led his city not to peace, but into a deeper uncertainty. It was no longer only a matter of a ruined wedding, but of a clash between two different understandings of justice. When Danaids sought to put his daughter on trial, he brought not only her act before the people, but also his own fear. Hypermestra's decision had ceased to be something that could be hidden and forgotten. Everyone had begun to see one thing clearly. On the same night, 49 sisters had submitted to a command, while one had stepped outside it. That division was not merely a difference within a family. It was a break that changed the moral direction of the story. A quiet act of defiance could sometimes endure longer than the loudest cry, and Hypermestra's did exactly that. She was no longer only a sister, but the one who proved in the middle of that whole night that another possibility had been possible. While preparations for the trial continued, Hypermestra kept waiting in the dungeon. Being in chains or under guard could not completely break her inner world. She still carried the fear of having defied her father's command, but she knew why she had done it. She did not have to defend it within herself. For Danaids, the opposite was true. The more he wanted to punish his daughter, the more he magnified his own fear before everyone. According to what was told in Argos, some had begun to say that the silent support of the goddesses stood beside Hypermestra, while others said she had simply listened to her heart. Whichever interpretation was true, one thing was clear. That night, two different paths within the same family had separated with final certainty. The 49 sisters, by obeying their father's command, had entered into a burden from which there could be no return. Hypermestra, by resisting that same command, had chosen another kind of loneliness. That was why her decision had not been only a personal moment of mercy, it had been a turning point that changed the direction of the line of descent Argos would tell in the future. A silent choice made in a single room had rewritten the meaning of the entire night. As day turned toward evening, the silence in Hypermestra's dungeon and the signal fire on Mount Lycia stood like two faces of the same story. One represented a woman who remained inside yet preserved her conscience, the other a man who survived outside and carried the reckoning that would return. Danaids may have thought that by punishing his daughter he could restore order, but the thing he called order had already been shattered that night. The forced marriages that Pelasgus had accepted to prevent war had led Argos not to safety, but into a deeper reckoning. Hypermestra's decision remained the one clear line within all that darkness. She had neither stood fully with her family, nor entirely broken away from them and grown lighter. Instead, she had chosen the heaviest path, to remain loyal to her conscience, while knowing the cost. That was why her silent resistance became not only an act that saved one man, but also a turn that shifted the moral center of the whole story. This new day, which had begun at dawn, was no ordinary next day. For Argos, for Danaids, and for Hypermestra, everything from that point forward would be shaped by the decision made in that single room. When dawn rose over Argos with a heavy, colorless light, the silence inside the palace had awakened earlier than the rest of the city. The mark of what had happened through the night remained not only in the rooms, but also on people's faces. Danaids imposed a harsh order, as if trying to suppress his fear, and once again gathered his daughters around his command. In his view, every trace left behind had to be erased, and the night had to be remembered only by its consequences. For that reason, in the first hours of the morning, part of the burden that remained inside the palace was prepared to be carried toward Lerna. The sisters were exhausted, but the line between obedience and habit had grown so blurred that most of them could no longer tell what they did willingly and what they did only because they were being carried along. Amimone walked at the front. She had once gone to Lerna in search of water. Now she returned by the same road with an entirely different weight. When they left Argos behind, the wind bent the dry grass, and the distant marsh waited like a shadow wrapped in mist. That journey was not only an attempt to conceal a trace, but also a desire to leave the burden of the night in a place no one could see. When they arrived at the Marshes of Lerna, the morning light lay over the water like a dull layer. This was a strange place that could be counted as neither entirely land nor fully water, a place that swallowed a person's voice into itself. Danaids' command was clear. The heaviest traces left from the night had to disappear here. As the sisters left the burdens they had carried into the mist and mud, they tried not to look into one another's faces, because if their eyes met, the weight of what they had done would become more visible. When Amimone touched the water with her hands, she did not feel the clear current that had once been Poseidon's gift, but a heavy and clouded silence. Autumn walked with her head bowed, and the other girls moved with the same mechanical resolve. Lerna seemed like a place ready to draw everything into itself and lower its voice. Yet whatever a person left to water, earth, or mist, the first echo of it continued inside. The sisters could not fully say that at that moment, but before they began the journey back, they had started to understand that nothing would ever be closed simply by being left behind. When they returned to Argos, the city had fully awakened, and the rumors moving around the palace had deepened the unease on the people's faces. Danaids did not want to let what had happened turn into scattered fear. So he moved quickly to take the second step as well. He tried to present the night not as a chaotic disaster, but as a rupture that had ended, and after which a new order would be built. The bodies left before the city gates had now become part not only of a personal reckoning, but of an event the whole city would remember. The people of Argos were shaken by what they saw, because these women, whom they had accepted as suppliants, now stood at the center of a story that pressed against the shared conscience of the city. For Pelasgus, this morning revealed in bare form how heavy a consequence had come from the necessary order he had accepted in order to prevent war. Danaids, meanwhile, knew that he had crossed a threshold from which there was no return. Even so, there remained within him a stubborn thought that in the end he might have succeeded in defeating his fate. But the one missing name in Hypermestra's chamber continued to shake that stubbornness at every moment. For exactly that reason, not only grief or fear, but also the idea of purification began to be spoken of in the palace. Within the sacred order of Argos, it was impossible for life to continue as though nothing had happened after so terrible a night. When priests, advisors, and elders gathered together, they said that this burden had to be met not only with punishment, but also with a kind of religious cleansing. Over time, according to what was told, the names of Athena and Hermes began to be spoken in this process by the command of Zeus, one as the goddess of reason and order, the other as the god of boundaries and transitions. In truth, what was seen was an attempt to make the sisters acceptable again before society through sacred water and certain rituals. The ceremony did not erase the burden in the heart, but it provided a covering considered necessary for the continuation of city life. The name of Athena came to represent the dignity of that covering, and the name of Hermes came to represent the idea of passage. In the ceremony, the sisters bowed their heads, washed their hands, and cleansed the traces upon them. But though the water lightened the skin, it did not lighten memory. They knew better than anyone that true purification had not come. After this ceremony, Danaids immediately turned his thoughts toward the future. In his eyes, the past could be controlled only if a new order was built. If his daughters remained shut away inside the palace, the rumors and fear would grow. If he married them off again, it might establish another framework, both politically and socially. And so it was announced that a great contest would be held in Argos. Danaids declared that he would give his daughters to new suitors, but that he would do so not in the form of an open bargain, but within a system of selection to be determined by competition. From the outside, this was presented as a magnificent and unusual ceremony. Yet the mood among the people was hesitant, because no one could fully believe that, after what had happened in a single night, marrying these women would be regarded only as an honor. Even so, the power of Danaids, the influence of the palace, and the curiosity created by the contest gathered a crowd. Hypermestra, however, was kept outside this arrangement, both because of the bridegroom she had let escape, and because in her father's eyes she now stood in another place. Amymne's name, too, was not spoken in quite the same way as those of her sisters. Around her, since the encounter at Lerna, there lingered the sense of a different fate. On the day of the contest, people gathered with quiet curiosity on the dusty plain of Argos. Danaids' daughters stood side by side in new garments, but the freshness upon them could not conceal the heaviness on their faces. Those who looked at them saw not only beauty, but also the night everyone knew of yet avoided speaking of aloud. As the young men took their places at the starting line, what filled the crowd was not excitement so much as tension. Because this contest seemed less like a celebration before a wedding than a controlled display staged to restore order. When the signal was given, the race began. The dust kicked up by their feet left everyone for a time in the same uncertainty. Danaids watched the outcome closely. He wanted less to place his daughters into truly happy lives than to rebuild around his own house a fabric of ties that could once again be managed. When the contest ended, names were matched, new unions were declared, and forced applause rose from the crowd. But at that moment, everyone understood at least this much. The new order established in Argos did not make the past forgotten. It only drew another layer over it. When evening came, the festival fires were lit, but the air around the flames did not grow warm. The new pairings had been announced, the purification ceremony had been performed, the journey to Lerna had been made and returned from, and the city had somehow tried to keep life moving. Even so, neither did Danaids find real security, nor did the sisters build calm within themselves, nor could the people of Argos simply leave behind what had happened. The marsh of Lerna continued to carry its mist. The springs continued to flow in Amimoni's name. Yet beneath everything there lived the feeling of an unsettled reckoning. From the outside, Danaids still appeared strong, but Hypermestra's decision and Lynceus, who had escaped beyond the mountains, kept his fear alive. When most of the sisters withdrew to their new chambers, they felt that the invisible weight left from the previous night had walked there with them. The attempt at purification had perhaps been enough to restart life, but it had not been enough to give meaning to what had happened. For that reason, Argos entered the night that day, not like a city rescued from disaster, but like a place trying to gather itself after disaster, while still carrying cracks beneath the surface. The fog that settled over Argos hung more heavily against the stone walls of the palace that day. In the throne room, Danaids sat inside a silence that looked unshakable from the outside, wanting to believe that the order he had built had finally protected him. The traces carried to Lerna, the silent outcome left at the city gates, and his daughter's submission to his command had made him think that he had rendered the prophet's words meaningless. Even so, that belief was never complete, because somewhere in the palace Hypermestra was still being held captive, and Lynceus was still living on as an unreachable possibility. That was exactly why the unrest inside Danaids never faded. As Hypermestra waited among the cold stones of the dungeon, she carried fear and hope at the same time. She had defied her father's command, and she had paid for it with her freedom, but she knew that Lynceus had survived. That knowledge was like a small but unextinguished light inside the darkness. For that reason, the silence hanging over the palace did not carry only one meaning. For Danaids, it was fear deferred, while for Hypermestra, it was the sign of a future that had not yet been lost. As Lynceus prepared to return from beyond the mountains, he was no longer the young bridegroom from the wedding night. He had lost his brothers, saved his own life through his wife's courage, and come to understand fully the meaning of the night he had left behind. As he moved along the harsh roads of Lerna, he did not confuse anger with haste, because the thing that brought him back was not revenge alone. He wanted to free Hypermestra from that dungeon, to make sure that the one pure decision of that night had not been in vain, and to end the rule Danaids had built on fear. As he approached Argos, the city no longer looked to him like a place remembered for weddings, feasts, or palace order. It had become the place where a father's fear had darkened an entire house. Lynceus did not return to the palace with an open army. He chose silence first. He remembered the passages and corridors Hypermestra had described, and he felt that the bond born in the night was carrying him back to those same walls once again. This return was not only the arrival of a man who had escaped, but the unfinished judgment coming back to the gate to be completed. By midnight, when he reached the inner paths of the palace, the order of the stones and the guards no longer felt foreign to him. Once he had entered this place like a guest. Now he passed through it to demand an accounting. He knew that he had to reach Hypermestra first. When he descended to the part where the dungeon lay, the silence in the corridors was heavy. The palace seemed worn out by the fear inside itself. The moment the door opened, Hypermestra saw that he had truly returned, and she could not speak for a long time. Hope turns into something thin while it waits. When it becomes real, a person first struggles to believe it. Lynceus removed the chains, helped Hypermestra to her feet, and for a moment they only looked at one another. In that look lived both the fear of the wedding night and the trust that had been built in spite of it. In that moment, Hypermestra truly understood that sending him away had not been in vain. And as Lynceus saw the exhaustion on his wife's face, he felt even more deeply that he had to complete this night not only for himself, but for her as well. When they came out of the dungeon together, the darkness inside the palace began for the first time to look like something that could be driven back. Even though Hypermestra had regained her freedom, they both knew that their task was not yet finished. Danaids was still alive, and the palace was still standing under the order of his fear. As Hypermestra showed the way to where her father was, her hands trembled, because no matter how justified a person may be, no one can remain completely calm while knowing that a father's end is near. Even so, there was no longer any turning back. Danaids' fear had poisoned not only his own life, but his daughters' lives, the Order of Argos, and every bond formed under the name of marriage. As they approached the throne room, dawn was beginning outside, and the first light was falling through the high windows of the palace in pale lines. At that moment, Danaids was still trying to cling to the conclusion he had built for himself. When the doors opened and he saw Lynceus before him, with Hypermestra standing at his side, the cold balance on his face broke apart completely for the first time. In that moment he understood that the prophecy had not been an abstract fear, but a reality that had walked to meet him. The judgment he had fled for years had now reached him in his own house, by the path opened by his own daughter. This was the heaviest moment of fear, when the thing you tried to escape found you exactly where you had hidden. Danaids clung first to anger. In the way he looked at Hypermestra there was betrayal, and in the way he looked at Lynceus there was fear he could no longer suppress. As if trying to defend himself, he began to say that he had done everything to protect his family and his bloodline, but his words no longer carried their former strength. The two people standing before him were destroying his entire order with a single truth. Everything built in the name of fear had only made fear grow in the end. Lynceus's voice was calm but firm. He said clearly that he had not come only to demand an accounting for his brothers, but to end the dark order of Danaids, who had turned his own daughters into instruments. When Hypermestra looked at her father's face, she saw for the first time not only hardness, but exhaustion. Danaids had believed that he could stop fate with his own cunning, yet every step had only brought it closer. That was the bitter side of prophecy. While a person believed that he was fleeing from it, he built it with his own hands. In the silence of the palace, a reckoning greater than words could carry was now standing before them. In the end, the judgment was completed exactly as the prophet had said. Danaids met his end as he had feared all his life, at the hand of a son-in-law. This moment felt less like a scene of glorious victory and more like a hard ending that had been awaited for a long time. So much fear had gathered inside the palace, and so much silence had been turned into command, that the fulfillment of the prophecy felt almost like an unavoidable balance. When Danaus fell, it was not only one man's life that ended. The dark command he had placed upon his daughter's shoulders collapsed at its center as well. Hypermestra did not greet this moment with great joy. The man before her had also been her father, and the completion of a prophecy always left behind a heavy emptiness rather than simple relief. Lynceus, meanwhile, carried what had happened not like an outburst of anger, but like an account finally settled. And so the last order built on fear in Argos also collapsed. Everyone who remained in the palace began to see more clearly that this end had not belonged only to that night, but had been the final station of the brothers' conflict that began on the banks of the Nile, of the prophecy, and of every bond formed by force. Sometimes a judgment ends only when it is fulfilled. That was true of Danaus's as well. After Danaus's fall, peace did not rise in Argos at once. A judgment had been completed, but the weight it left behind still remained. When Hypermestra and Lynceus appeared before the people, it was not seen only as the reunion of two young souls. They were also the sign of a new beginning rising out of the wreckage of the old order. The forced marriages that Pelasgus had accepted to prevent war had collapsed. Danaus's authority built on fear had ended, and the prophecy had completed its course. For the people of Argos, one of the most shattering truths was this: in the same family, 49 sisters had bowed to the command, while one had defied it and opened the way for a new bloodline. The man Hypermestra had saved was no longer only a bridegroom who had survived, but a name that would take its place in the future of Argos. For that reason, her decision began to carry a meaning far greater than a personal moment of mercy. The city began to see in Lynceus and Hypermestra the possibility of a new rule standing beside them, a new moral line against the old fear. Although Danaus's fall seemed to have closed the reckoning on earth, the burden of the wedding night did not end completely. While Hypermestra and Lynceus moved toward the beginning of a new order in Argos, another path of judgment opened for the other 49 sisters. They had obeyed their father's command and had become part of an irreversible choice on that same night. In mythic tradition, nights like this did not remain only in the world of the living. Their echo continued even after human life ended. For that reason, when the time came, the souls of the 49 sisters were taken to the underworld under Hermes' guidance. When they reached the shores of Acheron, palaces, wedding garments, and the protection their bloodline had once given them, no longer remained behind them. Only the weight of a shared night remained at their side. They had not been dragged there at random. A clear question stood before them and demanded an answer. Was fear and obedience to their father enough to lessen what they had done that night, or would the broken bonds still demand an account? Before them stood Minos, Rhadamanthys, and Argos. None of the three were merely figures who received the dead. They were the keepers of the final weighing. Minos stood in the center, leaning on the staff in his hand in silence. Rhadamanthys did not hide the sharp attention with which he examined souls. Argos listened to what was said within a hard but measured order. When the 49 sisters came before them, it became clear that what was being judged, there was not only one night, but several sacred bonds that had been broken within that same night. The bond of marriage, the right of hospitality, trust, refuge, and personal will had all become entangled within the same event, and then had been torn apart. Because of this, the court did not ask only, "What did you do?" It also asked, "Which boundary did you cross?" For the first time there, the sisters were stripped completely of the roles they had carried in their father's house. They were no longer daughters of a king, nor were they refugee brides. They were only souls standing before their own actions. The silence of the underworld made them feel that clearly from the very first moment. When their defense was heard, their words kept circling back to the same place: fear, pressure, and obedience. Some said they had not been able to resist Danaids' command. Some explained that they had seen the men before them as threats. Others admitted that they had not been able to imagine another path that night. These words were not completely empty. They truly had been shaped for a long time by the fear their father had carried. But Rhadamanthys said openly that even if fear explained everything, it did not excuse everything. Argos also reminded them that bonds such as marriage and hospitality were not merely temporary arrangements formed between human beings, but also carried a balance protected by the gods. It was there that they understood for the first time. Danaids' fear explained why they had chosen that path, but it did not separate them completely from its consequences. Because even if someone else had given the order, they had been the ones who had lived through the night and completed it. Minos remained silent for a long time. That silence weighed more heavily than words, because it was now clearly felt that the final judgment would draw a boundary, not only around the crime, but also around the excuse. At that very moment, Hypermestra's name was spoken in the court. She was present there not as the accused, but as the measure. Because she had lived through the same night, heard the same command, and remained within the same pressure, yet had not committed the same act. When her name was spoken, the defense of the 49 sisters was pressed into a narrower space. It was no longer as powerful to say there had been no other way, because within the same house, on the same night, another path had been chosen. Hypermestra's presence changed the tone of the judgment. It placed her before them not as an accusing example, but as proof that another choice had truly been possible. In this way, the court found the line by which it could judge them without turning them completely into monsters, yet without leaving them completely excused. Hypermestra's role was exactly this. As the one who had come from the same family and had made a different decision, she showed the boundary of the judgment. When her name was spoken, the 49 sisters saw more clearly for the first time that they were not only victims of their father, but also bearers of their own decisions. This was one of the heaviest moments in the underworld, because a person was sometimes shaken most deeply when they learned that another path had truly existed. After the judges weighed the matter silently among themselves, the judgment was announced. Minos rose and defined their punishment with a single phrase: fruitless labor. In the depths of Tartarus, the 49 sisters would try without end to fill a great jar by carrying water to it. But neither the vessels they carried would remain sound, nor would the jar ever fill. The water would seep from the containers they carried, and whatever remained would run out through the bottom of the jar. This punishment had not been chosen only to exhaust the body. It was a response fitted to the form of what they had done. That act, which had seemed complete in a single night, had in truth completed nothing and had only left behind a great absence. Now they would try to close that absence, but they would never succeed. Every drop of water they carried would slip away from their hands. Every new attempt would show once again that the effort before it had come to nothing. In this way, the punishment was built not so much on pain as on futility. Because some wrongs were understood better, not through a single blow, but within a continuous effort that never reached its end. That was why the judgment gave them not only weariness, but also an unending inward echo. When they were taken to Tartarus, the jar before them seemed at first glance as though it could be filled. That was the harshest part of the punishment, a task that seemed possible, yet was never completed. The first vessels were filled, the first steps were taken, the first waters were carried. But from the beginning it became clear that the water was leaking from the vessel and that what spilled did not remain in the jar. In that way, the judgment ceased to be something merely spoken and began to be lived. When Automit saw the result of the first attempt, she stared at the vessel in her hands for a long time. Amimone, meanwhile, watched the water go to waste and remembered the spring at Lerna. There, water had given life, but here it only made the lack visible. With every trip back and forth, the wedding night was remembered again, and with every emptying effort remained without result. That was the true harshness of Tartarus. Every movement made in order to forget only made the memory firmer. There, the 49 sisters were no longer individual women, but souls joined together within the same judgment. What held them together was not so much sisterhood as the endless repetition itself. The most painful part of this story was that Hypermestra's salvation had not saved the others. Her mercy had changed only her own path. For the 49 sisters who bore the burden of the shared night, it had not opened the door. The fact that one person had chosen what was right did not erase the responsibility of the others. The certainty of the judgment came precisely from this. And yet, Hypermestra's name remained like a light outside the darkness, because her choice showed that another path had truly been possible. So while Hypermestra's name came to be remembered with loyalty, a new bloodline, and another beginning, the names of the other 49 sisters became joined with endless labor. This division made visible not only the difference between the sisters, but also the logic of the judgment. Mercy had been able to save one person, but it had not been able to remove the burden of the shared crime entirely. When the first jars in the darkness of Tartarus were filled and emptied again, the decision was no longer merely declared, it was sealed. Danaus's fear had turned into his daughter's obedience, and that obedience had now turned into water running uselessly away. In this way, the judgment closed, and fruitless labor began. In the depths of Tartarus, time did not move forward. It only repeated itself. That was precisely why the punishment weighed so heavily on the 49 sisters, because pain did not come once and end there. It began again with every turn. After Minos' judgment was declared, they were led to a dark plain where a great cracked jar stood. The black water nearby looked at first glance like an ordinary spring, but nothing there was ordinary. Each of them was given a leaking vessel. The water they carried slipped away along the way, and what they poured into the jar drained out again through the bottom. At first, they thought it had been a trial. If they were a little more careful, if they moved a little faster, perhaps something would change. But they soon understood that skill, patience, and strength would be of no use there. That had been the very core of the punishment, labor that produced no result. These women, who had once been raised in palaces, crossed the sea by ship and stepped onto the shores of Argos with hope, now circled only around a jar they could never fill, returning in every attempt to the same lack. In the early days, Each of them tried to hold on to her own memories, automate thought of the last silent moment before the wedding night. Amimone remembered the coolness of the spring she had found at Lerna. That water had once brought life, but the water she carried here changed nothing. Agave remembered Danaus's face and tried to understand how fear had turned into a command, and how that command had passed into her own hand. But in Tartarus, even memory offered no comfort. Remembering did not cleanse anyone there. Instead, it bound them once more to the same point. Each time a vessel was filled, that night returned again, and with every emptying, it became more painfully clear that what had been done could not be sealed shut. After a time, the sisters spoke to one another less and less. There was nothing new left to say. They walked the same path, carried the same water, and heard the same sound. The sound of water slipping away, pulling loose, refusing to stay. In time, that sound blended into the wind of Tartarus and became the true rhythm of their punishment. The harshest part of that labor was not only that it never ended, it was that it could never be completed. The jar looked as though it would fill each time. The water seemed to gather, and then it slipped away again through the unseen openings at the bottom. That was why the punishment wore down not only the body but hope as well. The 49 sisters kept walking, and with every new attempt, they saw that the effort before it had been wasted. In the darkness of Tartarus, exhaustion brought no sleep. Remorse reached no end, and repetition never grew lighter. There, fruitless labor was not merely a task, it had become the very shape of what they endured. The act that had seemed complete in a single night had in fact resolved nothing and had only opened a deeper void. Now they tried to close that void, but they never could. In that way, Minos's judgment ceased to be words and became a living order. The water flowed, their hands grew heavy, their shoulders sagged, yet the jar remained empty. The punishment did not break their will all at once. Instead, it wore it down a little more with each attempt until it turned them into shadows that moved but arrived nowhere. Hypermestra's name remained outside that darkness, and for that very reason it was felt there all the more. For the 49 sisters, her absence was not only the loss of one sister, but the constant reminder that another choice had truly been possible. She had lived through the same night, heard the same command, and yet had not walked the same path. Because of that, the judgment in Tartarus revealed not only their shared guilt, but also the point at which that shared bond had been broken. While the sisters carried water, Hypermestra's name was joined in the world above with Lynceus, with another line, with another beginning. There, however, the names of the others became part of endless repetition. That division made the meaning of the punishment even sharper, because the matter was not only what had been done, it was whether another way of acting had been possible at the same moment. In the darkness of Hades, that question was no longer debated, it was simply lived. With every new turn, the 49 sisters understood it a little more clearly. Fear had explained them, but it had not saved them. Obedience had held them together, but it had not purified them. Tartarus taught that truth not by shouting it, but by placing the same empty jar before them again. Time there was not divided into days, months, or years. It was divided only into cycles, going to the water, filling the vessel, carrying it, pouring it out, seeing it emptied, and beginning again. In the end, the world of the 49 sisters narrowed into that circle. Once their lives had been surrounded by great words like Nile, Argos, Palace, wedding, flight, and prophecy. Now the only truth was the water slipping through their hands. The deep irony of the punishment also lay there. Danaus had spent his life trying to master fate. In the end, what fell to his daughters was the inability to master anything at all. The jar did not fill, the water was not held, and the labor did not end. In the darkness of Hades, the echo of empty vessels became the final judgment of this tale. While Hypermestra's choice opened the door above to a new life, every path led to the same point for the other 49 sisters. In that way, the story left behind two legacies. One path opened by mercy, the other entered through fear and locked in repetition with no way out. Tartarus did not confuse those two lines. In the darkness, it left only one outside and bound the others to endless labor beside the leaking jar. What remained from Danaus's story was not only the fulfillment of a prophecy. What proved heavier and more enduring was what a person could destroy once he began to mistake his fear for truth. Danaus had wanted to avoid what was coming for him, but over time he lost the line between protecting and ruling. At first he had been a father trying to keep his daughters away from danger. Then he began to turn their lives into an extension of his own fear. His greatest error was born there. For a person sometimes believed he was protecting love, when in truth he was narrowing the will of the one before him. Many sentences that began with "for your own good" could, without notice, become the language of pressure. This was Danaus's tragedy. While he fled the danger outside, he carried an even greater darkness into his own house. In that way, the story showed us not only the collapse of an ancient dynasty, but a truth that could be recognized in every age. If love suffocated freedom, it ceased to be love. If protection began to decide in a person's place, it gradually turned into domination. And once fear began to present itself as reason, it most often wounded those closest to it first. Aegyptos's share in this was no lighter, for his error had been that he turned his children into carriers of his own ambition. Instead of seeing his sons as human beings, as individual wills, as lives with destinies of their own, he saw them as extensions that would enlarge his power. That was why the conflict between Danaus and Aegyptos had not merely been a disagreement between two brothers. It was the collision of two different darknesses, one man's fear and the other man's ambition. One shut away his daughters in the name of protection, and the other pushed forward his sons in the name of dominion. In the end, both arrived at the same error. When they should have carried their children as something entrusted to them, they turned them into instruments for the emptiness within their own inner worlds. Ancient accounts did not always tell the end of Aegyptos in the same way. In some, his power unraveled. In others, he faded into distant shadow and disappeared. But no matter which version was brought forward, his legacy remained not as victory, but as ruin. For a person was remembered not only by the lands he conquered, but also by what he left behind to those who came after him. Aegyptos did not leave honor to his sons. He left them the hunger to possess. Danaus did not leave trust to his daughters. He left them fear. And so, while both brothers tried to strengthen their own bloodline, they in fact weakened the foundation of their own houses. By contrast, the story of Hypermestra and Lynceus stood as a quieter but more enduring answer, rising out of all that darkness. Their bond should not have been imagined as a fairy tale happiness that washed everything clean in a single night. For no life built upon such a heavy past ever began without stain. The dead remained behind them, along with broken trust, corrupted bonds, and a night that could not easily be forgotten. Argos had not awakened one morning and left everything behind. Hypermestra had not found peace without paying the price of the choice she made, and yet their remaining together still showed that another order had been possible. It showed that a bond built not through coercion, but through consent. Not through fear, but through conscience, not through blind obedience to command, but through measured choice, could be stronger. In the old genealogical accounts, a line stretched from this union into the future of Argos. The true importance of that detail was not merely that blood continued. Its true importance lay here. A merciful decision made in a single night could at times outlast great dynasties built upon fear. For human communities were shaped not only by power, but by the principle they carried. Hypermestra and Lynceus, being able to live together, did not erase the past, but it made the repetition of that past no longer inevitable. The fate of the remaining 49 sisters formed one of the harshest and most thought-provoking parts of the myths. In later and more widespread traditions, they were said to have been condemned in the underworld to fill a leaking vessel. But that punishment should not have been read merely as eternal torment. The language of the myth said here that a person could not always take back what he had done. The leaking vessel stood as a symbol of labor that continued in vain, but also as a symbol of the reckoning a person could never complete within himself. At times, life went on outside, order was restored, and cities continued on their course. And yet, an unclosed wound remained inside. No matter how hard one struggled, no matter how much busyness one found, no matter how many excuses one produced, that emptiness did not fill. That was why the punishment of the Danaids carried not only a mythological meaning, but a human one as well. A person at times created a void within himself because he bowed to another's command, because he remained silent so that order would not be disturbed, because he did not do what he knew was right out of fear. Then he tried to fill it with other things, but if the vessel leaked, it did not fill. The myth offered us a very plain lesson here. Something wrong did not become more right simply because it was done by a crowd. Once obedience took the place of conscience, something remained missing inside a person even if he escaped on the outside. The lesson that fell to Argos could not have been dismissed either. For the city first defended the right of asylum, then faced harder decisions under the pressure of fear, and in the end saw that the fractures within the palace had not been only the concern of kings. A community could not see the injustice that came to its gate, say this does not concern us, and keep itself wholly outside of it. Pelasgus's greatness lay in the fact that he did not turn the refugees away. But his limit also appeared there. Good intentions were not always enough. It was important to recognize what was right, but it was at least equally important to establish the order that would protect it all the way through. Ancient accounts did not always describe the end of Pelasgus in the same way. In some, he lost his throne. In others, he withdrew and remained in the shadows. But no matter which account was chosen, his name was remembered with a lesson. Justice was not completed merely by opening the gate. One also had to watch what was built beyond that opened gate. Otherwise, what began as mercy could, over time, be driven by hesitation toward the edge of another disaster. That lesson remained alive for the present as well. To stand against an injustice meant not only acting bravely in the first moment, but also carrying that courage forward. For at times, evil was fed not only by the power of the cruel, but also by the lateness of the good. But the brightest, most human, and most unforgettable point in the entire story still remained Hypermestra's quiet choice. She did not gather an army. She did not speak in the squares. She did not lead anyone behind her. She simply chose another path on the same night, under the same pressure, in the same darkness as everyone else. That was why her decision, though small in appearance, carried great consequences. For history did not always change through noise. At times, it changed with the first person in a house who refused the language of fear. At times, it changed with the one who first said no, where people had always said, "This was how it came, this was how it went." At times, it changed when a mother or father decided not to pass his own wound on to his children as an inheritance. At times, it changed when a worker no longer stayed silent in the face of injustice. At times, when a young person refused to continue the fear imposed on him, Hypermestra's greatness lay there. She showed us that mercy was not weakness. On the contrary, mercy was at times the act of choosing what was right, even while knowing the price one would pay. Conscience was at times heavier than the sword, because it did not strengthen a person at once. It left him alone first. And yet, the most lasting change was often born there. That was why two separate paths remained from this story. One was Danaids' path: fear, control, pressure, obedience, and in the end, enlarging with his own hands the disaster he had tried to flee. The other was Hypermestra's path: hesitation, conscience, loneliness, cost, and still the courage to choose what was right. These two paths did not remain only in antiquity. They appeared again in every home, every society, every generation. People were continually tested by the same questions. What would we sacrifice in the name of security? What would we remain silent about so that order would not be disturbed? Would we leave the fear passed down to us unchanged to our children, our workers, our students, our loved ones? Or would we break that chain somewhere? This was the true lesson the story left to the reader. A person could not always choose his fate. He could not, in most cases, determine the family into which he would be born, the age in which he would live, or the shadows into which he would fall. But at times, he could decide whether he would continue the darkness handed down to him. And sometimes, the whole future began in that decision. In the end, the prophecy may have been fulfilled. What Danaids feared may have returned and found him. Aegyptus's ambition may have driven his sons into disaster. The 49 sisters may have become, in the hard memory of myth, the symbol of unending labor. Pelasgus may have remained the name of being trapped between what was right and what was possible. But above all of that, a quieter and more lasting truth rose. Fear did not save a person. Fear only produced more fear. It narrowed the person, narrowed the home, narrowed the city, narrowed the future. Mercy, however, even if it seemed weak at first, began a new bloodline, a new order, a new possibility where a person refused to repeat the darkness within himself. That was why Danaids' story stood as a warning, while Hypermestra's story stood as a hope. One showed us the inheritance of fear, The other showed that inheritance could be broken. And perhaps the most unforgettable sentence of the tale was this: a person did not always change the world through great victories. At times, he changed the future simply by deciding not to continue the wrong that had been handed down to him. I hope that as you end your day, this ancient epic has been a good story for you. I look forward to your comments and requests. Do not forget to follow my channel. May the darkness of the night and the rhythm of the sea bring you peace. Until we meet again in another legend, in the breath of another hero. Love.